Asker had asked if he wanted to slip out. He was visiting his dad and then heading out to Jonathan tonight and see those folks, and asked if somebody could present the last piece of this chapter, and I volunteered. So we're going to start out in the book, page 128, and we're going to go through a couple of things here. And then he had said this would be a good opportunity for, because we're going to talk about budgeting, to maybe do a little budget. I was trying to get the screen to work up there, and we could have did it in Excel, right? But that didn't work, so we're going to go old school. We're going to do a whiteboard, and we're going to use the handy-dandy markers. So I'll probably have a couple of the kids in the back move, younger gentlemen move front then, so they can participate. Because I'm figuring some of the older folks here already know how to do this. So we're going to start out on page 128, and I'll just pick up there at the bottom, and it's halfway through. It says, "And how is your way of managing money working? Will you never have financial peace unless you will never have financial peace unless you choose to follow the wonderful, all-wise counselor described in the verses. The first step to financial peace is to allow the Prince of Peace to take control. You can have a relationship with someone who has infinite resources. It's more than just having a rich friend who gives you whatever you want. You must submit to lordship of Jesus Christ in every area of your life, including the management of all the money you have." That's going to be where we get into talking about budget a little bit. When you have resolved the question of who is the Lord of your life, then you will be ready to start learning what the Bible has to say about finances. God's Word addresses every decision you could possibly face about money: debt, counsel, honesty, work, saving and investing, giving, training children. We can be certain the Bible offers solutions for today's financial challenges. That's a good point, because so many people want to say, well, this book is really old and it doesn't cover everything that we have today because we're so modern. As Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. Maybe we take a little bit of time and read a little more closely. We'll find out there's an answer there. Usually it's an answer we don't want. So we tend not to look at that so close. One reason we have a hard time in understanding God's way of managing money is that we don't really understand who God is. We shrink him down to human limitations because that's what we see in everyday life. However, we must filter through the truth of God's Word. The way to expand our understanding is through studying the Bible. So here's where I'm going to jump out of the book for a couple minutes, because I had put some stuff together that I wanted to share. Because again, we're going to specifically start looking at budgeting. The first item below was develop a cash flow plan or a budget for the money you believe God will give you in the next year. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more and expand on a budget, because sometimes I think we think of a budget maybe not according to what God talks about a budget. In the Bible, it says we are not to waste what God has provided. That's the preliminary. That's why we put a budget together. It's so we don't waste. Sometimes people say, well, I don't want a budget because then that constrains me, and I want to be able to just buy what I want. Well, the purpose of a budget is so we don't waste. Every business that's out there tracks their dollars, and they track their equipment, and they track their man hours. And the reason they do that is to limit waste. Okay? And that's what we should be doing as good stewards as well. Proverbs 21:20 says there is a treasure to be desired and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but the foolish man spendeth it up. If we don't plan and budget how we use our money, it ends up disappearing. We end up wasting it on things. We're not supposed to be that way. We're supposed to have a good testimony to those that are around us, which means we need to be able to live a life that shows we give an account of what we have. In Luke 15:11 through 13, Jesus said, "And a certain man had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. And he divided unto them his living. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. You know, sometimes we get so focused on that prodigal son that we think, oh, the riotous living, you know, it was the evil things he spent his money on. Back up one phrase there. He wasted his substance. He didn't have a budget. In the end, the prodigal son goes back to his father. His father receives him. But remember what happened. He lost all his wealth. When the elder son came in, the father told the elder son, all that I have is thine. The younger son, even though he came home and was accepted back by his father, lost everything he had because he wasted it. Had he sat down and worked out a budget, he might have figured out, I'm spending it faster than it's coming in. I'm going to go negative soon. Now, that's the reason why he did that, I think, was because he was living in sin. You know, he disobeyed his father, wanted to go out and be his own person, and what did it get him? Without the knowledge and experience he could have gotten at home, it cost him everything that he was going to have one day. We need to be careful of that. We are to plan and budget how to use what God gives us. In Luke 14:28, it says, for which of you, intending to build a tower, sitteth not down first, and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it? We're all familiar with this one, right? Oh, yeah, you got to build a tower. You got to figure out you have enough before you go do it. But if the builder, and I'm in construction, so this is like hitting close to home for me because it happens a lot. If the builder or the person hiring me to build had a budget, they would have realized they don't have enough money to build the tower, but they do have enough money to build a really nice house. But because they didn't do a budget, instead of ending up with a really nice house, they end up with half a tower. Well, it's a little hard to use a half a tower. It don't keep you dry because you know you start from the ground up. So the half you're missing is the half that keeps the rain off you, right? And we see these things in the Bible and we tend to look past them, but they are so practical to our everyday life. In Proverbs 6:7-8, it says, go to the ant, thou sluggard. Now, I'm not saying people, if you don't have a budget, you're a sluggard. But again, follow the flow here. Consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest. God says, look, here's an ant, right? Forget about the sluggard part for a minute. Here's an ant. And what's that ant doing? Sort of budgeting, aren't they? The ants budget. They come out in the summer. They could eat all the food that they get, right? And instead, they put some back. Why? Because they're going to need it later, right? Everybody remembers the story of the ant and the grasshopper, right? Grasshopper had fun. Come winter, grasshopper starves and dies. The ants live through the winter. That's really what this is telling us. If we have a budget and we prepare, then when the lean times come, we can get through them. In 1 Timothy 5:8, it talks about when we don't budget correctly, our responsibilities aren't met. It says, if any provide not for his own, especially of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. You know, part of the reason we have a budget is, looking at the guys specifically, is to take care of the family, right? Without a budget, what happens to the money? It gets nickel and dimed away on different things. And then when a bill comes, when I was younger, we lived out of state, so everybody's clear. We had neighbors. They were children about the same age as we were, so we played together a lot. Their family, their dad worked, and he got paid biweekly. So that means he gets a check every 2 weeks. So when they got paid, they went grocery shopping. Well, till the end of the second week, all the groceries were gone, and there was no money left. And the kids used to hang out with us for supper, because that way there was food. You know, it's that planning. And the Bible says we as Christians are not supposed to be that way. If we're going to take care of our family, and by family then you look at not just your household, but then you look at the church, right? That's our church family. And we're supposed to take care of our own, right? And if we don't, That's a horrible testimony. God says that's worse than the infidels because they take care of their own, right? So we need to be careful of that. What happens when we don't budget, right? Because this is where, we didn't budget, right? So now we get to the point where the money's running out. What's the first thing we usually do? Right? And I'm saying I'm talking Christians, right? Forget about the world. Where's the first place we cut? Ray? That's right. The tithe gets cut, right? The offering gets cut. That money you were going to put aside for missions gets cut. We as Christians get guilty of that real fast, right? In Haggai, it says in verse 1, or chapter 1, verse 3, it says, "Then came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet, saying, Is it time for you, O ye, to dwell in your sealed houses, and this house to lie waste? Now therefore, thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. Ye have sown much, and bring in little. Ye eat, but ye have not enough. Ye drink, but ye are not filled with drink. Ye clothe you, but there is none warm. He that earneth wages to put in a bag with holes. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways." We as Christians, when we don't budget like we're supposed to, and the money starts drying up, start looking for, like I said, that place to cut. And the worst place you can cut is cutting God, right? He's the one that gave us everything we have. That should be the last thing that gets cut. We're commanded to budget for what God has given us. In Proverbs 27:23, it says, "Be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks, and look well to thy herds." When in the old, you have animals, right? Today, we animals are pets today, right? So we don't view them in the same way. And I think this is another one of those verses we sort of missed the important part. When if you're a farmer and you've got animals, they're not pets. They're income. They're a source of food. They're a source of clothing, right? Your whole livelihood is tied to those animals, okay? So when he says, "Be diligent to know the state of thy flocks," those are the milk ones, the milk cows over there, okay? So we know what we got in milk cows. And, if we get a young calf off of that, and it's a girl, you know what we can do? We can either replace one of our older cows, or we can sell that because it's a milk cow and it's worth money, right? Or we've got some sheep over here, and they can be sheared because they're good for clothing, right? We're looking at what God's given us, and we understand that there's a value in it, and we budget it. We don't go eat all the milk cows because we were hungry, right? It's like, man, I'm starving. Let's go eat the milk cow. Okay, and then tomorrow morning for breakfast, what are you going to drink? Because you ate the milk cow last night. Okay, the sheep over there that's providing wool so you can make clothes, you decide, well, you know what, lamb chops tonight. Well, okay, but now you're going to be cold in the winter. God says we are to look at what he's given us, and we work with it as we would work with a budget. If we do, God meets our needs, even when we cannot. Philippians 4:19, he says, "But my God shall supply all your need according to his riches and glory." Right? And that's a verse we can take, and it gets abused, right? Because I think that verse only works if we have been faithful with our money, if we have been doing what God told us we should do with our money. If we've been frivolous with it, if you took all your money and bought lottery tickets last week because the lottery's high, and now your cupboards are empty and you're praying for God for food, guess what? It's probably not going to get answered, okay? Because that's not how God works. First, we have to be faithful. I should say second, because first he was faithful. He died to save us. He was faithful first. Then we are to reciprocate that back. And when we don't, we're like an ungrateful child. Gimme, gimme, gimme. Well, how often does a parent give when we have ungrateful children? We don't, right? That doesn't last very long. Flip over here. So I was going to give you two little illustrations here. One was, and I thought it was fitting because this came from an unsaved man, and we were talking, and I found it interesting because he didn't mean it to be spiritual, but I made it spiritual because it was one of those lessons. This gentleman was taking a class at night as an adult, and they were talking about being rich. And the instructor said there's no such thing as being rich, because no matter how much money you have, you always want more. And of course, this guy was one of these guys who he was a pretty deep thinker, and he's sitting there shaking his head no, and the instructor said, oh, well, so-and-so disagrees. He said, how would you define being rich? And he said, you're rich when you can go buy whatever you want and not have to look at the price tag. Then you're rich. And he told me this story, and he's like, what do you think about that? And I said, well, you know what? I said, as a Christian, I would buy that. Well, I was like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, my God says he'll supply all my needs, right? So as a Christian, if I only ever want what I need, I can go buy whatever I need, right? Because God said he'll supply it. Where we get in trouble is when we start wanting more than we need, and then it blows our budget. I wanted to finish up with, how many of you know George Mueller? George Mueller had an orphanage back in the day, and you might have heard this story. If you did, it's still a good story, and it makes a valid point, because it makes a point about how God supplies our needs. So George Mueller, he had an orphanage. He's taking care of these kids. It says, one morning, all the plates and cups and bowls on the table were empty. There was no food in the larder, no money to buy food. The children were standing, waiting for their morning meal, when Mueller said, children, you know we must be in time for school. Now, George Mueller was known to be a prayer warrior. Then lifting up his hands, he prayed, dear Father, we thank thee for what thou art going to give us to eat. Okay? So get the picture. Here's a bunch of young children that are hungry. There is no food. The table's set. That's faith, right? He believes God's going to meet the need. Then he prays and thanks God for the food. What food? There's no food. As he finished praying, there's a knock at the door. The baker stood there and said, Mr. Mueller, I couldn't sleep last night. Somehow I felt you didn't have bread for breakfast, and the Lord wanted me to send you some. So I got up at 2 o'clock this morning and baked bread, and I have brought it. Right. Mr. Mueller thanked the baker, and no sooner had he left, there's a second knock at the door. It was the milkman. He announced that his milk cart had broken down right in front of the orphanage, and he would like to give the children his cans of fresh milk so he could empty his wagon to repair it. Now, God meets the needs. They didn't have bacon and eggs for breakfast, right? They didn't have the expensive cereal, but God met the need. He provided milk and he provided bread. And I think that's how we need to remember God works. He provides our need, but in order to provide the need, we had to be faithful with what he originally gave us. And to be faithful with what he originally gave us, we need to have an accounting of it, which we would call a budget. Okay? So, that's what I wanted to go over here. And then Pastor had suggested that we set up the easel and we put together a budget, sample budget, for some of the young folks so that they could see how a budget works, because it is important and it's biblical. So, since my TV didn't work, my IT guy let me down. That's where you're supposed to say, yeah, I don't know what my dad was thinking. We brought the handy dandy easel, if it stays. Okay. And I had my markers in my pocket. So when we go to put a budget together, what pieces of information do we need to know? I have a business degree, so I can make it sound really fancy if I wanted to, but. Income. And?
The needs,
What's that?
the needs, what you need.
Okay. Hold on, I gotta get a black marker that works. I brought a, you probably won't see that in the back. So we got income and, what'd you say?
The needs, what you need.
The need, like, well, I need income. Yeah, the expense part, right? Wow, I'm gonna go through a bunch of markers here, you can see that already. There's that one there. Okay, this one broke big. It's hard to find a good marker. The expense part, how's that? That's better. Okay, and as I tell the kids, just so you know, geniuses can't spell. So if you see anything up here that's like a typo, it's okay.
I got no problem with that.
Okay, okay, here, this is the hard part. Should we start with the income first? How do you calculate income?
Right? How much you work on how much you pay.
Okay, I'll back up one. How do you figure a budget? What's your duration?
Forever.
That one's tough to figure. You're gonna figure monthly, right? Typically, we figure our expenses and our income monthly. Why is that?
Because it's usually online.
Well, yes and no. Why do we sort of look monthly? That's a good question. There's time periods. Why do we use them?
Different expenses are monthly?
Right. Where there's certain expenses that are monthly expenses, so it makes sense to figure it monthly. It'd be more work if we cut it down to each week. We'd have to put $5 here, $10 there, you know what I mean? So we'll tend to do things by the month. Okay, so if we're looking at monthly, how do you figure your income for the month?
If you get paid weekly times 4,
Okay,
if you bi-weekly
So-
times 2.
so if you're figuring your income, you could take your weekly times 4. Now, first budgeting tip. How many weeks are in a month?
There's 35 a year, but there's 13 4-week periods in a year.
We calculated at work when we figure manpower at 4.22 is how many weeks are in a month. That .22 covers the extra days. What do those extra days mean? There's extra days each month. So if you get paid on Friday, how many Fridays are in every month? Yes, you go. How many? 4. That's it? There's never any more?
Yeah. Some months in 5.
4 months of the year, there's 5, right? So your first budgeting tip, however you want to say it, if you base your budget off of a 4-week month, 4 times a year, you're going to have an extra paycheck. And what can you do with an extra paycheck? Go to Starbucks, right? Buy a new phone. Now, if you're starting out, that extra paycheck could be what you use to start to build your savings, right? You can start putting that extra paycheck back. That's 4 of those a year. That's an instant help, right? Or you might give it all to missions. I'm just saying. Right? But, okay, so that's how we base our income. On the expense side, how do we figure our expenses? That's your bills, right? Are all bills a bill you get in the mail? bills and there's surprise bills, right? Yeah, surprise bills aren't fun, okay? But they happen, right? So if you're gonna calculate your expenses, what's your first expense?
Food.
tax, because you don't even get a look at that, that's what's on our application.
Assuming the government's, they're all in, so they take their money first. But anyway, what's your first expense? Hmm? Your tithe is your first expense, just saying. Except for Joe, he wanted food.
Thank you.
Your tithe comes out first, right? Now, that's, as a Christian, that should be how we look at our money. Because the first thing we should take out of our check should be that thank gift back to God, right? We don't pray for our food after we ate. We don't thank God for the food after the meal's over, right? We thank for God before we eat, okay? Our tithe should be the first thing coming out. What else do we need money for? Think big and we'll work our way small.
Insurance.
And I'll give you a hint. My God will supply all your needs. You should start with the need list. You got food. I would have started with something a little bigger than that.
Insurance. Housing. Oh.
Somewhere to live, right? I'll call it rent, whatever, right? We can call it whatever you want, but you got rent, you got food, right? What else do we got?
Yes, for the car.
Do we own the car,
Well, our loan,
right? You might have a car payment. And then you gotta do what?
so we gas,
You gotta put gas in it. What else do you need if you have a car?
insurance,
Oh, insurance. What else are you gonna have if you have a car?
maintenance.
Yeah, remember when Paul talked about that thorn in the flesh? Those are called cars. Right? You're gonna have maintenance, right? I'm gonna call it repair, because that's easier to spell. Right?
Does that repair come under surprises?
Yeah, that's one of those surprise things, right? Now, we can budget for surprises sometimes, because you, pretty much if you have a car, who here has a car that's had a car for any other time besides probably, well, you, I know, had a repair bill. Repair bill? Yeah, so who here has had a car at all, and never had a repair bill? Right? Never, right? Yeah. Something, it's a car, it's gonna break, right? Okay, so we end up with repair bills for cars, right? What else do we need here? I'm gonna go back to the rent thing, the place where you live.
Oh, well, that might be your insurance for your land, your property. I mean.
Yeah, you might have to have insurance for, whoop, sorry. You might have to have insurance for this one and insurance for this one. Because even if you rent, you can have renter's insurance, right? Okay. What else do we got? If you're thinking housing now,
Utilities,
utility bills, and what are those? Good.
water, gas,
Yeah, water,
electric,
gas, again, the gas guy loves us. Electric,
sewer,
oh yeah, water, sewer. What else we got in there?
Trash.
Huh?
Trash.
Garbage, trash, right?
Gifts,
Huh?
gift, G-I-F-T-S,
That's not.
gifts,
Gifts?
yeah,
You buy me something?
no. Moms have to have gift money.
Right. Hold on to that thought. finish up housing. What else do we got for housing with bills?
You have taxes up there?
Yeah, you might have taxes, right? What else you got?
Medical.
How about repairs to said domicile, right?
Yeah.
And? Huh? I'm running out of room. I'll have to switch to the other side. You could have repairs. What else do you have if you have a home?
When you get old, you need medical stuff.
Yep. I'll start a list over here. Joe wants to jump over here to medical. Yeah. Insurance, health insurance, right? So I'm gonna cut this one off here. You can have health insurance. And that could be a couple of different things, right?
Sure.
Because that's gonna take you into what, Joe? If you have health insurance, why do you have it?
To pay your medical costs.
Uh-huh. And do they pay all your bills?
Not all of them.
Ah, you're gonna have medical bills, right?
Yep, still.
This falls into the surprise category again, right? If we were marking some of these, we could put some of these into, that surprise category, right? Down here. What else are we thinking?
Wait,
Huh? What do we got?
Clothes.
Clothing, right?
very nice.
You gotta have clothes, right? Clothes wear out. We're not the children of Israel. We're not in the wilderness for 40 years, and God's gonna keep our shoes from wearing out. You're gonna need some of them.
Education.
You might have to do some training, education, right?
That's important.
There we go. I was waiting for that one. Phone. And what goes with phone?
Internet.
Internet. Right?
Need a bigger board.
I know. We got a lot of bills. Makes a point, doesn't it? Income, bills, right? Anybody got anything else they can think of?
All the little junk you need like envelopes and stuff. so-
Yeah, oh, the miscellaneous.
Paper, toothpaste.
The miscellaneous. You're gonna have, you've got stamps, envelopes, right? I'll put something like that down there, stamps, just so we got ETC, right? That's a cost. You're gonna have it. I'm always amazed when a young couple starts out and they have, like if they both lived at home and they start out, I often thought a good wedding gift is just a basket of that stuff. Paper clips, stamps, envelopes, scissors, all that stuff. I mean, you don't have any of that stuff. Like, you don't have a paper and pencil. Like, yeah, you gotta go buy all that, and none of it's cheap. What else are we missing on our budget?
Burial.
What's that?
Burial.
Burial, yeah. End of life. That falls under the surprise part.
Wrong.
Pets.
Oh, no.
Pets?
Life insurance.
Yep. Where did I put insurance? Up here, we had insurance. Notice this insurance thing shows up a lot, doesn't it? Rent, you have a homeowner insurance, car insurance, health insurance, and life insurance, right? That sort of goes with, right? Right? Now, what about just savings? Right? We should be saving money, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because if we're not saving money, what, if we make, if, round numbers just for fun, if you made $2,000 here and you spend $2,000 down here, what's going in the savings account? You might have those extra 4 weeks of pay, which, that's better than nothing, right? But you're living pretty tight until you start getting that buffer built, right? Anybody think of anything else? I figured the girls were gonna say hair appointments, right? Gotta pay to get your hair done, right? But that's a real thing, unless you have a barber that you know you can go to. Huh?
Oh,
Yeah. Memberships, that's a real thing. Memberships?
yeah. Right.
Okay. That's a pretty good run. Because we're getting about that time. So again, this is fun to do now. One day, you're gonna have to do it for real. And you're gonna have to sit down and figure, you're gonna have to make decisions. You might be putting off buying them new shoes because you need to buy some food, right? Joe, I forgot, you had said presents. You didn't remind me of that.
That's hard.
I'm gonna put down vacay,
Oh,
vacay/presents, right?
right.
Okay? When you don't have enough money to pay for this stuff, right? What's the one thing we're not supposed to cut?
First one,
The first one. That's the one we don't cut. And then the rest of this, we're supposed to fit within that budget. And I do believe that if we keep it in perspective, if we keep this where it's supposed to be, these things where they're supposed to be, and that might mean there are no pets. That might mean you can't afford life insurance. That might mean you're not able to put any money in the savings account this month. Or, you know what? Maybe there isn't no internet, right? You're gonna have to go through here, but if we keep these things in that perspective, in their proper place, I believe we end up where George Mueller ended up. When we don't have enough of this to cover what's here, but we've kept this in the right order, God's still gonna supply the needs. There's still gonna be food on the table. There's still gonna be a roof over our head. There's still gonna be clothes to wear. But if we get this out of balance, you know what happens to us? We end up in debt. We end up with a poor testimony to those around us. Because we can't go and now witness to individuals about how our God is great. And our God is a saving God. And our God is a delivering God. When they see our life is a mess financially, and we can't meet our basic needs. Okay? Okay. We'll go to prayer requests.